Mark Stevens, welcome to the Modern Sales Management Show.
Thanks, Josh. Thanks for having me.
Well, you're one of the people who I'm most excited about to have as a guest in the first few episodes of this show, because we get together whenever we can, whenever we're both in town, Saturday mornings, early Saturday mornings, and we grab coffee at a local coffee shop, and we talk about what's going on in business, in sales technology, and it's a really great dialogue, and I think you have a great perspective. So I'm excited to get your thoughts on not only where we've been, but where we are going.
Absolutely happy to be here.
All right. So, but before we do, let's get into kind of your background. What
Sure.
drew you to sales in the first place? Not necessarily even sales management, but sales.
Right. Well, so over the course of my career, I've operated really in three areas: finance, events and media, and then technology, in those three areas. And I've had varying sales roles, sales management roles in all three of those. I think ultimately what I do enjoy quite a bit is really working directly with large customers, kind of building a vision around where they're going with their own business and how what I'm using, whether that's related to finance or whether it's been related to media and events or technology, how that can help them accomplish what they want to accomplish. So it kind of puts you almost in a true sales role, puts you in a consultant's role, really. So.
And when you are building relationships with senior executives at other companies, it's not about features and talking points. You're talking finance. You're talking the strategy and the future of their company and where you fit in. Would you agree?
Yeah, look, I think at the end of the day, all good salespeople have to start with a good strategic vision of what they offer and then what their customer needs. And really, you build it's all based on relationships. As you kind of go up the food chain, it's all these larger relationships where you're really building a level of insight for the people you work with. That's where you add the most value. So,
what size teams have you overseen? Just to give
it's varied. I mean, in finance, it's been in boutique finance, it's been north of 20, 25 people, and then I've run multiple teams and events that were 15 or so. And then in my current role, we've got a small team that does OEM licensing and strategic alliances for an enterprise software company, and that team is 7 people. So,
one of the things that I want to talk about today is through your decades of experience, what are the biggest challenges and changes that CROs and COOs and anybody who's responsible for hitting that revenue target, what are they seeing today? Because you see it in your company, but you're talking to other companies that are going through the same thing.
I think
structural. Go ahead.
Structural. So, look, I think that the market, and let me talk to technology right now because that's kind of where I've been for the last several years. The enterprise technology is very rapidly changing, right? That's just a given. And also the tools around how you manage teams and the requirements you have to do. In any given market, what we're seeing is the windows of opportunity are collapsed very quickly. You can extend into an adjacent market, find some greenfield opportunity, and that window will be closed very, very quickly. So what it means is companies have to move faster than they've ever moved. You have to get teams onboarded more quickly. So it's kind of the requirements become that much greater because you have to move at a faster pace. So all of that, there's more noise in the marketplace. So if you look across technology, think about marketing teams and sales teams, they're all beholden to kind of the clock that is driving the competitive cycle right now. And that has accelerated just in the last 3 years significantly. And I've seen it talking to other CROs. I mean, they look out into other parts of the market. Where can they establish differentiation against competitors? And once they know what that is and they go after that part of the market, the reality is if they're successful, there are adjacent entrants that come in very, very quickly and capture that. So you always have, how do you maintain your differentiation and stay ahead of competition, right? How do you distinguish yourself and maintain some level of competitive leverage, on other companies you're working against?
So how do the most successful sales managers today, how do you address that? And I know one of the things we talked about was the changing role of of your team and your team makeup. And so can you talk a little bit about AEs?
Yeah, I would think that, right. What we're seeing, I would say this across just in the last 5 years, six years at 3 different companies I've worked with and run teams for. Look, there's some standard pieces that have emerged. At the top level, any enterprise company has a standard stack, and that is SAP for financials, Salesforce for CRM, and then generally a Microsoft stack everywhere else. And what's happened is around, for example, Salesforce, there's cropped up an entire ecosystem to support those efforts. So I would say the distinguishing factor that's changed is if you're running teams of account executives, those guys are working top of funnel and mid funnel. And so how do you enhance that and accelerate that? That's all driven through an entirely new set of sales enablement tools that have literally just come up in the last 3 years. Outreach, Sales Loft, all those tools. So there's a very, very much a sales stack emphasis on optimizing team performance. And that's literally, I think it was Salesforce for a long time, but in the last 3 to 5 years, now you've got all these other tools that have emerged from that. How quickly can your team get up to speed on it, adopt it, and really leverage that? If you don't have those tools, you can't really be competitive, particularly in technology.
I'm going to interrupt you really quickly because
sure.
Other than the closed deals metric, what are some of those metrics that you're using tools to optimize?
Oh, well, I mean, clearly the thing we focus on, you measure all the way through the funnel, right? Acceleration through the funnel, and depending on what, in software, of course, there's evaluation licenses, there's POCs, there's demos, all of those. We kind of measure our acceleration between all those milestones in the customer journey that we take. And when you're doing technology licensing, those are generally longer sales cycles with larger 7-figure type opportunities. Those are going to take anywhere from 6 months to a year. And the one thing you have to do is and this is true across the board, we all know that committees are making buying decisions now. But for what we do in technology, we're aligning with product management teams, C-level teams, engineering teams. So we have to literally herd all these senior teams inside these customers to bring them together to align to the same kind of product vision, because we have to be a part of their roadmap as they go forward. So what I really think that is distinguishing things now is that if you're managing AE teams, you're very much about how do you leverage technology efficiently to really collapse those milestones in your sales cycle. When you're talking about senior teams, really what you're leveraging is the quality of the relationships. And those, senior teams are going to be on the road, you can be at events, and how do you develop the kind of relationships at the high level, at the C-suite that can turn into those types of opportunities? So a little bit of difference where you're measured, like AE teams are measured clearly differently than, let's say, director level teams that are doing larger type deals.
Okay, so you do manage those groups differently. Your AEs, have different tools and objectives and processes than your senior teams.
That's right. I mean, generally, look, AEs are going to be supported by BDR teams, ISR teams. And as you kind of move up that experience threshold with senior teams, you're kind of building, like in our case, and this is very standard technology, you're marrying a solution architect with a senior salesperson, right? And there's two things that distinguish that, I think, and this has been one of the challenges now in the current environment, is you can't travel, right? The things that you normally do as a senior team at events, and doing private events, larger conferences, all of that has been swept away. Everybody is working like we are here behind computers. I mean, the funny part about all that is, interestingly, there's more engagement than ever because people are not competing with commuting, air travel, all the typical things that you see. But I would say this, that in our company, for example, managing AE teams is all about leveraging better insight. That is the big distinguishing factor, I think, in the last 3 years. The tools are evolving to leverage AI and ML so that you can drive better insight into customer engagement. And that's going to be the big change, I think, as you go forward the next 2-3 years, because you won't be able to compete adequately in software if you don't have good predictive intelligence about buying intent and opportunities based on milestones at your prospects. That's just going to be table stakes for any company that's, that is selling software, for example.
Okay, so the big shift for AEs is, they're used to selling more based on volume and solution selling. And highlight one more time kind of what they can expect now?
The biggest difference is if you go back 3 years ago, what did we typically do? We had analytics and data, right? We would describe a sales team around some basic thresholds, KPIs, et cetera. What's really evolving now, companies that are accelerating what they're doing quarter over quarter are deeply involved in experimentation. They literally have people dedicated to experimenting on messaging and personas and what's working around process. So basically you think about really deeply knowing your personas, testing and experimenting with messaging, and that's what's collapsed because they're being able to drive their own internal insight around product and use cases based on that messaging. That's the biggest piece that I've noticed has really changed is experiment regularly. And a lot of companies don't do this. I mean, look, even large enterprises are still trying to get their feet under that. But you know, if you think about it, the more you can experiment and figure out, because everything is cloud-based, right? So you've got a view, you've got analytics into customer adoption, you know, who's dropping out of certain parts of the pipeline in the messaging cycle. But the ability to test that at scale in the last 3 years, all those enablement tools have cropped up. And that's really what I think software companies that are competing quickly, startups that are gaining revenue quickly and driving, you know, customer adoption, they're doing those kind of things uniquely compared to other companies.
You know, experimenting sounds easy, you know, testing sounds easy, but a lot of people don't realize the infrastructure that is needed to create actionable data around those tests. That's right. Really good point. Do AEs have a role at the top of the funnel anymore?
Well, look, it depends on company size. I would say that you generally, you think about in startups, they're going to start with, let's say, one BDR, ISR supporting, you know, 3 account reps, 4 account reps. Ideally, as you get more efficient, you should need fewer BDRs or ISRs to support an AE. AEs are what are really going to drive mid-funnel down to close, right? That we all know. But and that's an enterprise, clearly. But in a startup, you know, you may have just a handful of BDRs supporting a much larger set of AEs, right? That's a little bit different. But as you gain more efficiency with these tools and you get better adoption, what you end up finding is that you should be able to have, even as your company grows, a fewer level of BDRs to support a larger number of account executives.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. How do you manage a team around buyer intent? How has that shifted the way that you manage a team? Because you have that extra data. How do you tell them to use it?
Well, I think what we've seen, and buyer intent, look, there's only a couple companies that are really out there with it now. ZoomInfo is in market, and Bombora. Those are the two primarily that people look at. And they both approach it very differently. ZoomInfo is using machine learning across the entire web to make certain decisions about what buyer intent is based on certain categories of products, right? Bombora is going directly to publishers, and publishers are selling anonymized data to Bombora. There's like 5,000 publishers. I would say this, what we have found, and our usage of it is relatively new, but what we have found is this: it allows you to overlay what are your look at prospects that are using some of your partner products, overlay that to what you sell, who has interest in that, and in that intersection is where we are finding that we can drive real interest, that we can message it properly and we get a higher response rate. So I think the whole buyer intent piece is relatively new. If you just look at the last 6 months, I think it's moving very quickly. And I think within 2-3 years, you will find that the average company is not going to be without buyer intent. I mean, there's always the scoop data based on, you know, Owler is, all those folks are doing news items, but buyer intent data that really looks at what are people consuming on the web, what are they downloading, what are they searching for. That, you know, they always say there's kind of truth in Google search, and I think that that's where this is all kind of driving. So, and we're new to it. I mean, we've been doing it just a few months, but I think it's certainly a key part of our process. And we've integrated into our BDR teams, and then we're bringing it down into the field as well.
That's really exciting. I like you guys you're not only experimenting out in the market, but you're experimenting inside your organization to capitalize on things that aren't widely available, widely adopted, and widely proven yet. So the last point on AEs and what has changed, how do your teams stay competitive? What are some of the sales management tips that you've employed?
Yep. I would say, so first, I think you have to start with a culture of learning and a culture of sales enablement. And it sounds like we said before, it sounds easy. You have to do that, because really what an AE has to do, you have to, first you start with really good hiring. You can never get around good hiring. That's a given, right? That's really important. Onboarding has to be smooth, and you have to have a really good process for it. And then you move people right into enablement. And that's both product and sales training. So those are areas that we've really focused on deeply. And we're moving into an area of micro enablements. So how do we piecemeal it out so that people are staying? I mean, this sounds really easy, but when you get in large organizations and you're tracking what people are consuming, you'd be shocked at trying to bring 100% of the sales force into enablement. It's very, very difficult, right? So we're measuring that very closely, and there's all kinds of tools, Showpad and other tools for it. But I think that what's changing for us and what we're seeing is an enablement-driven culture so that you can demonstrate extreme competence, because the only way that an AE is going to be able to drive insight with a customer is if they have extreme competence in that customer's market and that customer's competitors. And you'll only do that by first really knowing your own products deeply and be able to make the connections where, how does that align to what your customer's use cases are?
I like those. Those are really actionable tips. So with senior teams, now senior teams, enterprise companies are going to have these senior salespeople, senior business development partnership people.
Right.
For smaller
Right.
companies, it may be kind of a add-on role to the executive team. Can you outline the main responsibilities of these senior teams?
Yeah, let me say this. When you're managing senior teams, I think first and foremost, and I say the same way as managing teams, you manage up and down. You manage the team, which is really coaching. I think that is purely, my experience has been the quality of coaching is what matters and the strength of your Rolodex. If you're coming into a team, what you need to be able to deliver for them quickly is your ability to rapidly learn and master the product set, master the use cases for the key customers, understand that well. You got to do that within the first 30 days, right? That's the first thing I would say. Then secondly, what is the quality of your ability to coach those guys, to understand individually how they sell, and then what drives conversion? I have found over and over in my case that it's first knowing those individual reps that I manage and work with, understanding how they sell, aligned to what I bring to it, and then also as a manager, if you're going in and working side by side on deals or bringing them into new opportunities, what's the strength of your Rolodex? Do you bring a good Rolodex into any company? And that speaks to what we all have to do. In any role, as you move now, since LinkedIn 15 years ago, and you move through your sales career, all of these things that you're doing are table stakes, building the network, maintaining what you do, so that when you're stepping into a new opportunity at a new company with a team, you can leverage those networks into those companies. That's just fundamental. People have an expectation of that.
So when it comes to coaching, what works and what doesn't work in your experience? What are the things that you either tried and have flopped or just not been as effective? And what are the things that your go-to tactics for coaching people?
First, so let's just say you're stepping into a new role at a company. The first thing you got to do is kind of beyond anything, you have to be transparent so you're authentic. If you're not transparent to people, you can't be authentic, right? That's the first thing they have to have, which is owning owning immediately what you don't know and what you're striving to learn. Within the first 30 days, getting your arms around the company's product set and the customers and the use cases. Those three things are mandatory. You really have to be the one that can show that you can learn quickly and rapidly. And then, because it's the only way you're going to step into opportunities and calls and meetings where you're going to add value. I mean, if you think about it, if they're going to bring in a senior leader, they want to know that leader is going to add value. And the other piece of this that goes along with it, you manage down, but you also manage up, which means that you're going upstream into the organization, the leadership, to bring resources down to the team. This is true in any large enterprise. Any large enterprise, they're highly siloed. You have to work across legal, finance, marketing, and you've got to build trust inside those teams and bring resources down to your own team so your team can succeed faster. And it builds more visibility for your team. So I would say generally what I found works is first 30 days, map out what your learning curve is going to be and what you have to accomplish from a product, customer, and use case standpoint. Write it all down, and repetition builds belief. You've got to really ingrain that. Then you're prepared to step into those calls and meetings with your team, and also introduce them into part of your Rolodex so you can build new opportunities. At the same time, you're having those meetings above, you're having, one-on-ones with your own boss and skip level meetings with leadership and identifying what are the core things that your team needs to succeed and bringing those down. Now, I will say this, the final piece of this, and it sounds, I think it's really important, and it's probably easier with A's than more senior teams, but you really have to speak to what is the team's mission inside the company? What is the team thought of to deliver within the company from senior leadership's view? How do they view the team and what the team's mission is? And does it align tightly with what the company's trying to accomplish? In some cases, in a startup, it's the first set of customers you've got to accomplish. Is it the B round, the C round? Is it an exit to a strategic? Understanding those goals and making sure that everything you're doing with your own team inside the company aligns those larger goals, because that's how you're going to get the attention of leadership and get the resources you need.
I like that you brought up that you need to be a servant leader for your team. You need, if they're successful, you're successful, and the company's successful, and you have to have that mindset. And that takes being an advocate and building relationships, doing your job as a leader, a sales leader, and building those relationships and building that trust so that you can advocate for your team to get them what they need, whether it's tools or training or additional data, to be successful, because it benefits everybody.
That's right. That's right. And you can't manage people really. At the end of the day, I've done this a lot. You can coach. You can provide quality coaching. You don't manage senior people. They've run their own businesses for a number of years, maybe 2 decades or so. And what you've got to do, if you're good, is learn quickly, and then drive insight. Drive insight to your team and help drive insight to customers.
And I like that. That leads into kind of, how do you balance with senior teams, the strategic focus that they need with tactics that they have to execute?
Yeah, I mean, look, we've heard the old adage all the time that revenue solves all problems, and that's a cliche and a truth, because it's true. You have to. I would say this. It starts with knowing how to forecast realistically, given the flows in the market. Like, look, we've come into this time of COVID. Every company out there had to recast their forecasts for the back half of this year because nobody really has visibility. So it starts with that, right? Have a realistic forecast, because what you get to is, you always have to absolutely meet and ideally exceed your number. When you do that, you build trust and visibility upstream to senior leadership. So that's fundamental. But I always like to say, because people can get really, if they've been individual contributors for a long time, they get totally locked in the mindset of, show me the money, what am I driving on revenue? Make sure that they think strategically, because you can't really, what C-suite always needs is people within the company that can understand the market, the positioning, and the direction of going just like they do. What are the goals that your CEO, CFO, CTO need to accomplish, right? Make sure you're fully aligned to that and that you can speak to it. And I don't mean you, but your team. If your team can speak to those goals very explicitly, then at least they're thinking strategically while they operate tactically. How do you
track that? Is your CRM built out to track that, or does each senior person just know their?
No, look, I like to say that Salesforce opportunity screens can only capture so much, right? We fully customize those. But what's the one thing every company has? And this is true whether you're a startup or you're a mid-market company or you're enterprise. Your best performers, you have to figure out how to capture their domain knowledge and their relationships, because when they walk out the door, they're taking that with them if you haven't captured it. So what we've really done is we're using other tools around that to kind of build out. I mean, some of it, frankly, I'll be honest, is like smart sheets, where we attach that to opportunity screens. But the reality is that you have to be able to, if anyone on your team leaves and you bring a new person in, they have to understand the relationships and an account profile. So we make a big deal of doing account profiles that allow anyone who would leave the team, and we've got a lot of senior people that have been here for a long time, that anyone could step into that role. That is one of the things I will tell you that is a challenge in CRMs still to this day, is that you can't capture the nuance and the history around relationships. You can capture, what are the email threads, all that, you got to read through that. But how do you have to instill that. So as we go forward, we always insist everybody does weekly write-ups on given deals. So we build kind of a case history, if you will. that gets attached to the account record. And then we do quarterly reviews with all of our customers, in our case. And so when we do those quarterly business reviews, we can really capture what's changed in terms of their business, what's changed as they have insight into the future, the next 2 quarters. So I would say that's a good part art plus science. I don't think that's been fully mastered yet by any company. So
I think that's really good insight. Like there's still room to improve.
Oh, there is, absolutely.
So that kind of takes us into sales execution. And if you look at, I mean, one of the things I like about talking to you about this is because you're iterating and your business is changing, you're trying new things so quickly, so that when we talk, I mean, just think 2 years ago, 3 years ago, the shift has been dramatic, especially in enterprise sales.
Oh, yeah.
What has changed on the execution side, and how has that changed the way that you manage?
I would say this, on the execution side, with all the tools, what also happens is this: there's greater transparency, more insight. Let me tell you one thing, give you an example. What has developed out of COVID with all of these sales teams that cannot jump on planes? Like our teams globally cannot get on planes and go meet customers. Everyone is behind WebEx or Teams or Zoom. So what companies are getting now is much greater ability to track how people are utilizing these tools. So with that, there's tremendous transparency to how people use. So I would say the execution has changed. And I will tell you, we don't know until we're a year out from this thing now what this is going to look like. I mean, they basically have said that of all the teams that have gone, everyone who's gone home to work remote, 30% will never go back to the office. So I think what's incumbent in execution is there's going to be much greater transparency. There's an entire remote worker infrastructure that has been built out just in 3 months. Zoom, the investment Zoom has made alone to build out this infrastructure that can scale to hundreds of millions of users. That's all brand new stuff, right? That's just in 3 months. So I don't think we know just yet, but I will tell you that in 2 years, greater transparency, which drives more accountability. And I will say the companies that are winning and succeeding are iterating quickly because they have a really solid learning culture. People, I mean, if you think about this, and this is true in technology, Gartner will write a report that looks out the next 3 years, and they're going to make some fairly, you can agree or disagree, but they're going to go out 3 years, and you've got to say to your team, can you fully align to where we live today, to where Gartner's saying this market will be in 3 years, and then make sure you've aligned that to what the customer use case is and what the customer cares about. Because, I mean, if you can't help your customer know where they've got to arrive in 2 or 3 years, how can you really provide insight and be trusted? You can't. So I think there's some new challenges that just with this current environment have cropped up, and we won't know the result of that. I mean, everybody's kind of working their way through it, right? Slowly, people are going to come back into offices. I mean, and the one challenge in enterprise sales is you can't get on airplanes. Most of what we do when we're out, we are in boardrooms, we are in conference rooms, and we are whiteboarding solutions. We are doing very interactive type conversational selling with C-level folks, really deeply understand their business, and there's a full iterative process we go through. We're trying to do that now, from WebEx meetings and Zoom meetings. It's just a completely different approach to doing it. So
how are you changing your coaching, and how are you advocating for your team to continue to allow them to keep the right mindset and keep the right productivity through this shift?
I think everybody, I think it's an absolute challenge for every company out there. I've talked to so many of our partners, and these are all very large tech companies. Everybody has the same challenges. You have to, you're having regular check-ins with your folks. Everybody now, when you go into a call, goes video right from the beginning. Remember, a few years ago, you'd get on a Zoom call and it would just be pictures of people's faces. Now everybody's live on video. Everyone's more comfortable with it. They've been doing it for a while. I think that the main focus you do when you lead a team is make sure that everybody on the team understands the tactical value of revenue generation and the strategic value you bring, and that you are making sure that you are espousing that regularly across leadership within your company. You're going to be called upon to report, but they want to hear, okay, what are you going to do differently? Everything we're doing right now is changing, right? I would say that the world has accelerated. It's not that things have changed. It's what was going to happen 5 years from now has been brought forward maybe 4.5 years. It's all just happening sooner than we thought, right? So within that environment, there's a lot you don't know. But I think that based on what you do know, that the communication you do, I live on video probably 7 to 8 hours a day. Literally every day, I'm doing video calls. Every call I do is video across within the company and with partners. And look, on one level, we're doing video in a way that we didn't do before with prospects and customers, right? I mean, so it's not ideal, but it's as good as we can do right now until we get back on the road and we're in front of folks. So,
right. Now I appreciate that insight. So what's working and what's not in terms of bringing marketing and sales together to capitalize on the shift and beyond?
I would say this, look, when you think about what marketing has to do, marketing has to build top of funnel. They got to build pipeline. And I've seen so many companies that are so siloed, right? So what you end up doing is you say to salespeople, just go work accounts, go do the selling, and then marketing is kind of siloed off from that. You have to get marketing leadership in customer meetings. So you bring them into your large customer meetings and you let them hear from the customer about what they need, what's driving their buying decisions, right? If you don't do that, you cannot align sales. So I think there's two things that are happening now. Get marketing leadership involved in direct customer interaction. And then two, bring marketing down to sales. So when we talk about buying intent, we want to bring that down into our field. So a field has a view of that. Now we want to qualify accounts and qualify opportunities with our BDR teams and shift it down. But you got to provide opportunity views, like the scoops and such from Discover Org and Zoom. You got to provide that down to the field as well. Our top performers in our company, the top AEs, are also the biggest consumers of Discover Org and Zoom info. I mean, they consume it unbelievably every day, multiple times throughout the day. So there's a direct correlation to that. So I think that the way you break down the silos, and I've seen it so often, is you got to just make sure there's engagement between marketing and customers, and you got to find a few tools that you bring right into your sales team so they feel some ownership of that process, right? They're not just waiting to get the leads, give me the Glengarry leads, that kind of thing. You got to bring them into the process more tightly. That's the only way to solve it, I think, particularly in technology.
So let's wrap up with kind of where do we go after 2020 and what does leading sales teams look like after this year?
Well, I think two things are being redefined. I think that, look, as I like to say, demographics are the future. That's an obvious statement. But right now, the largest cohort of living Americans are millennials, which means you're 22 to 39 years old, right? That's right in the sweet spot of where a lot of AEs live on sales teams. And what have they been brought up? They want the same experience they have as consumers, which is, their bank is their phone, right? They have an expectation of the way they utilize tools. So if you're running teams, you better make sure that the tools you're utilizing can accomplish the same thing for these teams. I see the future being, they want flexibility, they want mobility, they want to work wherever they're at. I mean, the whole idea that we're going to define people by show up, run through, in every major metro market in the country, there's a huge commute anymore. People are not going to be doing that as much. It's highly inefficient, right? I think we're going to have a de-urbanization that can happen. So teams, good quality individuals can live anywhere. As long as they're close to an airport, they can really live anywhere, if you think about it. So I think what's going to change is millennials are going to drive it. They're going to drive what sales teams are going to do over the next 10 to 15 years. And think about the set of expectations they have and the way they want to work. And you've got to make sure that your coaching, your tool set, and your processes kind of align to that mindset. That's what we've certainly seen in our organization.
No, I like that. So 10 years ago, people talked about the consumerization of technology. And 5 years ago, people talked about how your customers, your prospects expect that from their marketing experience. That's because they're so used to it in their consumer lives. And
That's right.
Now you're saying it's happening inside your organization, and it's what motivates, drives, and enables your sales team.
What you're going to see, and Gartner believes this, and they've written about it extensively, is in 5 years, if you think about what AI and ML, machine learning, are doing across tool sets, what they're creating is really an ambient experience of knowing what you're going to need as a salesperson. What's the kind of configuration you're going to need there? And I think we're going to drive tremendous insight. We're going to drive more engagement. We're really going to pinpoint so we have better quality interactions with customers and with prospects. I think all of that's going to be improved because there's just going to be greater insight. into what people need, what the use cases are, and what they're actually consuming. Because you know that before you talk to an individual prospect,
Can you still hear me? Did I lose you? Did I lose you? Did I lose you? Let me see. No. Can you hear me? Give me a thumbs up if you can hear me. Can you hear me? There you are.
yeah, you can hear me now. I think it dropped me after 40 minutes, right? Isn't that what it did?
No, I don't know what happened because I mean it's a paid account. So we're just about
You
to
can
wrap
probably
up.
edit that if you want to finish one last question. You can
Yeah.
edit out what we just
We
died
totally.
on, but.
I totally will. So you were saying when you talk to prospects, I want you to finish your thought. You said when you talk to prospects.
Well, or was I saying that what's going to change? Wasn't the question what will change over the course as we look out the next 2-3 years?
Yeah, and you just had a final thought on. You're wrapping up a thought on. Look, you said, look, Josh, when you talk to prospects, it doesn't matter. I can edit it before that.
Well, let me speak to this because we're still recording. So I think there's 2 areas that things are going to dynamically change, and you look about managing sales teams in the next 2-3 years. And Gartner defined this as people-centric and space-centric, right? So people-centric are going to be all those levels of automation, hyper-automation, and experiential that you're going to have as you engage prospects, right? And I think we're going to, as I said before, we're going to drive better insight with AI and machine learning inside all these tools, these cloud-based tools, enablement tools. You're going to drive much better insight into customer interactions. It'll be a higher quality conversation, ideally, right? And then I think from a space-centric standpoint, I said before that really what's going to define the next 2-3 years is the whole nature of the way people work is going to change, right? Because COVID has taken everybody remote. Some portion of them will never come back to the office. You have Google and Twitter that are saying you don't need to work in the office again. So you're going to, and maybe there'll be some level of deurbanization, which is going to change where people are going to locate themselves, right? So you're going to find quality people wherever they happen to be, and the tools are going to be there, and the infrastructure is going to be there so they can still have the right kind of customer interactions. And at a senior level, you're always going to be traveling out to meet with customers and prospects. And at some point, maybe at least summer of 2021, we'll be back flying again. There will be events, conferences, because you're never going to get around the fact human beings are social animals, and they have to be able to congregate and meet. And the body language you get when you're in front of somebody and meeting them and having dinner, all those things, we'll get back to at some point. It's just going to take some time.
Right, and those directly translate to the quality of the relationship. So
that's right. That's right.
Thank you, Mark Stevens. Mark, do you have any final sales management advice for our listeners?
I would say, I guess 2 things. I think focus on, as a manager or a coach of people, you really are defined by the quality of the insight you bring to your teams and to the customers. And to do that, you always have to stay fresh, which means you have to cast your net fairly wide in terms of where markets are moving, what tools are being used. I mean, this, that, the whole sales enablement game it's changing every 6 months. You're turning over new companies, new tools are evolving. So to be a quality leader, you have to, there's certain kind of table stakes disciplines that you have to have. You've got to constantly be learning, constantly be out there in the market and seeing it. And you've really got to have your pulse on the customers that your team is faced with so that you can add insight on a continual basis. Because I really believe the challenger sale is one of the primary things that we've seen teams can really leverage as they go higher up the food chain and get good value with. So
Mark, where can people who are listening to this who want to connect with you, where can they find you online?
You can find me on LinkedIn. It's linkedin.com / Mark D.A. Stevens. So I was able to get a kind of a custom LinkedIn page. I guess nobody had that, but I had my middle initial, but it's linkedin.com / Mark D.A. Stevens.
Perfect. I'll connect it in the show notes. And that does it for this episode of the Modern Sales Management Podcast. Thanks for listening.